And this is Dean Ryan, who will be doing the talk, and he works with young offenders and excluded young people in North London, and he also wrote an article on knife crime in The Guardian in February, and it's still available online. Okay, thanks, Dean.
All right, thanks, comrades. The first thing I have to say, I have to give my apologies. I was supposed to be doing this meeting with a man who I've just started to do some collaboration with, a guy called Chris Bagley. Chris is an educational psychologist, and he was up all night with toothache, so he would text me early this morning, and I've been in a bit of a panic ever since, because actually I really, really wanted Chris to come here today and speak. As I say, Chris is an educational psychologist, and what educational psychologists do, they look at the way young people's brains learn and how they function. And I think it's really, really important to understand when you work, like as Nikki said, I work with young offenders. And when you work with a lot of young people in the criminal justice system, you'll very quickly see to know that a lot of them have undiagnosed learning difficulties. A lot of them have SEN needs and stuff. And some of the research that Chris has done has been really, really invaluable. And I think actually, so I'm going to try and bring in some of the stuff he does. And actually, we did a meeting together back in Hackney. Also, my phone wasn't the time myself. We did a meeting back in Hackney in a couple of months ago, and people told me that they really liked Chris's input because he brought a real human face to some of the victims that some of the people who we work with, and I think it's really, really important. So, for example, I did some research. The BBC brought out a document. They brought out some research about the first 100 victims of fatal stabbings in 2019. And when you look at the, it's quite varied actually. Even though there's a real disparity, there's a real disproportionality of young black males in that thing, teenage males. Actually, they don't make up the majority of the victims. There's a real sort of age range. The youngest victim is a 2-month-old baby. The oldest victim was an 80-year-old woman, and it's quite interesting when you watch it. When you scroll, if you go, I advise people to go online and look at it. You can see the first 100 victims of knife crime on the BBC, because when you hover over the faces of them, actually they give you a little sort of biography. And when it's black teenagers, they just give you the incident. But when it's a sort of white middle class person who was the victim of the stabbing, they say so and so was loved by their family, so and so was described as a caring father, a wonderful mother, a so and so and so and so. And I think there's a real narrative. There's a real narrative that the media have. There's a real narrative that they try and sort of make out that actually young people who commit crimes or young people who are in gangs and become the victims of crimes, actually they're bad. It's all really, really bad. And I think some of the stuff that Chris has done when he did his talk was to let us see how actually these young people are human beings. And as I said in that meeting, actually we work with young people sometimes who do monstrous things, but those young people are not monsters, And I think when you look at the victims, I think it's like both Chris and I have worked with young people who've been crack babies. These are young people whose parents were addicted, and mothers were addicted to crack, and when they were babies, they had to be weaned off a really nasty, pernicious drug. And those young people have gone on to develop quite challenging personalities and have quite challenging lives, and actually some of them have done really, really horrific things. But those people are not less, not less deserving than our sympathy. In some ways, they're more deserving than our sympathy. I would argue they're more deserving because actually the pain and suffering that they have starts before they've even left the womb, And I think actually, and when you talk about those victims, said they'd be dearly missed and loved by their families, actually a lot of the people that we work with have had trauma in their lives from quite early. And actually, I think it's really, really important that we see these young people who both committing the crimes and young people who are the victims of the crimes, or everyone. It's a sad tale for everyone. So I'm going to try and incorporate some of Chris's work. He's an expert, I'm not, but I do a lot of work alongside educational psychologists, and have to read a lot of reports by them. So I'll try and incorporate some of the stuff they do. So I think it's important to say, why we're having this meeting. I've done this meeting numerous times at Marxism, and every year it seems that in the last few years it seems to have got worse. I mean, only this week We saw the tragic stabbing of a woman who lost her baby, and I think sometimes on a daily basis you wake up and you see some really horrible things. And I have to say it's been a particularly tough year for me. I'm a bit, to be honest, a bit knife crimed out, because actually I've worked with this year I've worked with young people who've both been the victims and the perpetrators of fatal stabbings, and actually it's quite horrible turning on the news in the morning before you come to work and finding out that a young person who you've worked with, or actually I've seen incidents on the news where I've been able to identify the young person who's been stabbed before the people have been revealed, because actually I know the road and I know the tensions that's been happening there, so it's quite horrible. But I think in order for us to understand what's going on and actually to see how we can fight to shape a socialist, so this is an event called Marxism, and this is about how we can fight to shape a better world. And I think in order to understand that, I think one of the things we need to do is actually look at what's going on. And one of the things I really want to do is look at government policy and look at past and present, to look at what's created the situation, what's the environment, what their response is, and actually what we as socialists should be arguing and what we should be doing. So, for example, I think back in February, Sajid Javid, the Tory Home Secretary, said he was going to bring out a whole new raft of laws and measures. He said he was going to bring out some stuff called 9 crime prevention orders, right? And amongst some of these orders he was going to do is actually, it meant that young people as young as 12 who've never committed any offence, not been caught with a knife, but if they appear in drill music videos that expose violent lyrics, those young people could be persecuted under new powers given to the police. He also mentioned things like actually banning people from certain areas doing stuff and all that. Now, apart from the band and drill, which I'm going to come back to later, band and drill music, actually a lot of those police powers have already existed. The police have got powers, they're called CBO, criminal behaviour orders, which mean that young people can be banned from meeting up in areas that they live, congregating with their friends and stuff like that. Now, I want to ask you, we're all, we're adults in this room, we're like, how many people here would find it easy to obey a law which stopped you from meeting up with your friends and family, that stopped you from going to hanging out in the places that you lived and were used to, accustomed to? We're talking about young people. Some of them people have been actually involved in things like catalysed drug trade and whatever. It's no, it's no surprise that a lot of those young people don't comply with those orders, and those young people get breached and get further trapped. And especially the whole system of law enforcement is about creating a situation where young people become very, very trapped in the criminal justice system. And actually, it's very, very racist thing. People might have heard of, I don't know if people have heard of a thing called the gangs matrix. The gangs matrix was something that was brought in by David Cameron's government after the 2011 riots. And it was supposed to help the police to identify people who are dangerous, who are violent gang members and stuff like that. But actually, it's a very, very racist piece of legislation. What it does is actually criminalises young people. A lot of young people go to school, hang out with each other, live on the same estate as each other. And if you're spotted by the police saying hello to someone who's deemed to be a gang nominal, then you could be put on that register. So it's actually, it traps and incriminates young people from very, very, very easily. Very disgustingly, if young people are stabbed, and I do know this has happened, this is a real thing, this is not something I'm making up, I know this has happened to young people. I know young people who have been stabbed, who then do not want to tell the police about the stabbing because of fear of reprisals. The police say to them, well, we think this was a gang-related incident, therefore you must be a gang member, and you're not talking to us, so we're going to put you on the gang matrix. So the system traps people in, and rather than actually being about justice, it's about perpetuating and actually, I would say, social control. And I think if Sajid Javid and the Tories are really serious about tackling knife crime, one of the things they should do is actually look at their own history, look at their own policies. I think there's been lots of studies which have shown that actually, when we look at the drug trade, which is fueling a lot of youth violence, when we look at that, a lot of the sort of environment for that was actually created by the Tory government, by actually Margaret Thatcher and actually Ronald Reagan, by neoliberalism. There's a good book here John Pitts, The Reluctant Gangsters, he talks about it, about how the misery of the 80s. There's another good book which I haven't bought called A World of Gangs by a guy called John Hegedor. Talks about how actually, I've got a quote which I ain't got time to read, I don't think so, but you know, a lot of people have identified the source of the drug trade as coming out of the misery. I grew up in Hoxton in East London in the 1980s, and I was a teenager, and I was involved in what would have been called a postcode gang back in the day. And actually, I remember heroin was rife, crack cocaine, and actually this is because of the misery that was causing, you know, in America there was widespread deindustrialisation, in Britain as well, and actually it's a time of real grim, high unemployment, stuff like that, and actually a lot of the job opportunities that affected young people, you know, I ended up going on a thing called a YTS scheme, which was like a youth training scheme. Actually it was rubbish, gave you a few quid in your pocket, and actually a lot of teenagers, some people are nodding, like the other people remember, alright? Actually, it was a terrible thing. But I think the Tories as well, the way they've attacked education has also been a real problem. The Tories in 1988 brought in an Education Act which took away the right of schools to set their own curriculum. It brought in a national curriculum, and it basically was about teaching young people to know their place. It wasn't about free thinking, it was about actually educating young people to be part of the system, not to challenge the notion that the British Empire was anything other than a wonderful, beneficial, benevolent institution. Actually, that was really, really rubbish. And they also brought in 1996, they brought in school league tables, which meant that actually schools could attract more middle-class parents if they what that really done means that actually since then schools have been really, really keen to kick out anyone who's got any sort of learning difficulty, any sort of disruptive behaviour. And in the years 2016 to 2017, something like 41 pupils a day are permanently excluded from school. Actually, it's gone up since then, but 41 pupils. And think about what that means to their lives. I mean, as well as that, Savage Javids was also part of the Cameron government that got rid of educational maintenance allowances, which gave students £30 a week, enabled them to go to college and stuff. And I think, you know, it speaks volumes for the agenda of this government, that the government can actually pass laws and legislation that make it easier for them to arrest 12-year-old kids who appear in drill music videos, yet the people who are responsible for putting the flammable cladding on Grenfell Tower can walk free. It shows you the absolute disgusting, behaviour there. And I think it's also one of the things that makes you really, really angry is some of the narratives about how this is a problem within the black community, how this is about black fathers, absenteeism and all of this stuff, you know. But there's been numerous surveys, as I said, that have showed you that actually there were parts of the world, like Glasgow, when Glasgow was the knife capital it was the knife crime capital of Europe, no one blamed feckless white fathers. But Buddha Lidgell feels quite comfortable within the current racist climate to try and say, well, knife crime is all about black absentee fathers. You know what I mean? This is absolute rubbish. And I think there's a good example in this survey here. Reluctant Gangsters, what he does, he goes and he does a study of all the London boroughs, and he colour codes them, he calls them the red, white and blue boroughs, and he looks at gang involvement, and I think it's a really good quote because it shows you the sort of the stupidity of trying to identify race as the source of stuff. This is what he says. It says, although in the red, white and blue boroughs, the majority of gang involved young people were black, African Caribbean or mixed heritage, a substantial minority of white and South Asian young people were involved. However, although ethnicity was a shaping force in local street cultures, it is clear that the violent gang phenomenon is not reducible to the question of race. Glasgow has a legacy of inter-gang violence perpetrated by white young people that stretches back over a century. In certain parts of the city, men in their 70s and 80s still claim affiliation to local gangs. Similarly, the violent gang conflict in Liverpool, which hit the headlines in 2007 with the murder of 11-year-old Rhys Jones, involved mainly white adolescents and young adults. Indeed, in seeking an explanation for the gang phenomenon. We have found that social class offers a more salient explanatory schema than race. And I think that's quite right. Actually, gangs come about all over the world, and it's about poverty, it's about a lack of opportunity, and actually we know because of racism that actually black people are more likely to be working class and more likely to live in stuff. And I think a lot of police, a lot of the narratives around stuff, a lot of the stuff is about, oh, we know that, they're trying to associate drugs. Actually, there's some good reports that say that actually white drug use within the white community is more, you're more likely, it's more higher than amongst the black community. But there's this whole sort of fiction which has been created, this whole image in the media that somehow black communities are riven with drugs, and actually that means you have to have some sort of specialist, sort of targeted response to that. And I think there's been a really good report, the Colour of Injustice, and I'd really urge people to read it, where it looks at stop and search and the use around drug laws. And this is what they have to say about this. They say, while police narratives about stop and search revolve around knives, gangs, organised crime groups, drug supply, county lines, and modern slavery, our analysis tells a different picture. One of deprived minority communities being over-policed and selectively criminalised for minor drug possession offences that are largely ignored in other contexts and for other groups. And I think that's 100% right. And when we look at what's happening with the hypocrisy of Michael Gove, I work with young people who, when they have a drug offence on their record, get barred from going to college, get barred from taking up jobs, get barred from doing a whole range of things, but Michael Gove doesn't think that his cocaine use should exclude him from running for Prime Minister. And actually we have to say, it's an absolute travesty, that Michael Gove, who says actually that he was, he classifies himself as being lucky that he wasn't arrested. Actually, he's not lucky that he wasn't arrested. Actually, the truth of the matter, if you're some sort of Tory toff who's going to the Henbury Regatta and you've got 3, 4, 5 grams of coke in your back pocket, you're far less likely to be stopped and searched than you are if you're a black boy with a 10 bag of weed. They call him a Benz of weed going to the Notting Hill Carnival. And then you see time and time again, year after year after year, the Notting Hill Carnival's coming up. I'm going to make sure to take the camera because every year I'll get photos of the police harassing black youth. And I think when we look at some of the more, we look at some of the stuff that's happening around young people that the Tories that are trying to ignore, we see stuff like, we see that there's something like 79,000 homeless families, young people who then, because of the housing market, because of the benefit system, with oh God, I can't forget call that. Universal credit, because of universal credit and stuff like that. You see that actually a lot of these families are being made homeless, and they've gone from school to school, and actually it's no surprise that if young people are living in cramped temporary accommodation with with damp and whatever, that those young people are going to go onto the streets, and it's quite And we look as well at some of the victims. A lot of talk has been around county lines, and I work with a lot of young people who've been arrested in places like Hastings, Norfolk, a whole range of stuff. And actually, when I was a young boy, the drugs trade, the drugs industry has always been quite really exploitative, but it's much more so now. Back in the day, you could sell if you lost a bag of weed that you were supposed to sell, you would still have to pay the dealer. That's the case now, but what's the case is now? Actually, a lot of young people are living in conditions which is, no beds, being forced to go and stay in places. And actually, what has made it easy for drug gangs to target these young people is a lot of these young people are care leavers in the care system, so-called looked after young children, and stuff. And it's and when we look at the violence that comes out of this, it's because the drugs trade is worth something like £300 billion a year, and in the drugs industry, we see that violence has become common cause because actually, you think about it, the legal companies can use the law. The law is made on the side of the rich. There's always employers, there's tribunals, there's this, that, and the other. Actually, even though the drugs industry is phenomenally profitable, they have to use violence. And there's a great book which I advise them to read called Narconomics. And this is what the guy who writes it, Tom Wainwright, says. He says, in a normal company, if an employee steals or a supplier fails to provide goods that have been paid for, the firm can get redress from the courts. A drug cartel obviously can't. If a courier makes off with a stash of money or importer fails to deliver a shipment of good drugs, the only way that a criminal organisation can enforce their contracts is with violence. And that's why a capacity to intimidate and kill is at the heart of every drug cartel success. And I think that's true. And I think what I'm not trying to say to you that actually the murders on our streets are because of South American drug barons ordering and whatever. But what I'm trying to say to you is the same way that capitalist business models and modes of production replicate themselves around the world. Actually, the same thing happens with the organised crime. And actually, we see that lots of young criminal gangs have to use violence, and more violence is spread and stuff. But I want to just take a look into this a bit more, because I think it's understand who's doing the stabbings and why. All right, and there's some good research about it. I think I'd like to use the votes, the voices of the young people themselves. There's this research by the South Bank University called From Postcodes to Profit, which came out a couple of years ago. And what they did was interview lots of young people who were basically on youth offending orders, and lots of workers as well. And I think it's really good getting their voices and actually having the voices of young people who are involved in it. So I'm going to read out some stuff, if you bear with me. It says, so this is the voice of one ex-gang participant. He says, so I could be a younger that will carry knives, and I don't care about stabbing people. So you will do the dirty work for people. So in that sense, one of the elders can go up and say, oh yes, I have an issue with this person, deal with him. I do it repeatedly until I get a reputation of, right, that guy is crazy. He will stab you in seconds. He doesn't care. And then you will gain more of a status, and more people just respect you. So there's a whole thing about actually owners employing young people to go out and do their dirty work for them. But I think sometimes you can think that these people are just crazy, and I think it's important to understand that, as I say, that the drug violence is just part and parcel of it. There's a situation that happened in Waltham Forest. Waltham Forest seems to have a particularly bad gang problem, and actually what happened was there's a gang, one of the local sort of little couriers of the little runners run off with some drugs. So the gang catch him. What they do is they kidnap him. Right, they kidnap him. They then tie him up. They stab him 17 times. They film it, and then they post it to his mother. Right? Why do they do that? It's because they want to spread fear in the community. They want to say, actually, if you mess with us, this is what's gonna happen. But what's quite interesting about that is one of the people who knew some of the people involved says this. This is what he says. He says, I grew up with some of them. Some of them are really nice blokes, but that's just the drugs business. Everyone does it. It's kind of expected. It's terrible, but these blokes are nutters. So you can see that actually, even though violence is part of some of the drug trade, it's not that people are insanely mad. Actually, it's about reinforcing your territory. And I think a lot of people, I used to do gang workshops, and a lot of people, like young people, used to say to you, well, actually, police call us a gang, police say this, but it's not. It's just that I grew up in a certain estate, and it's about expediency. It's about actually, there's a saying that my son said to me many years ago, that was a saying that I used to say when I was a young man. It's like, it's always good to know if you mend them. And what that means is actually, even though you're not part of the gang, even though you're not part of the situation, if you've been to school with someone who then gets a reputation for being a gang member, it's always good to stay on their side. It's always good to know if you man them. So actually, you don't become a victim, and becoming a victim is a massive, massive thing in youth culture, where young people, you're either victims or you're not. And actually, most young people, and not surprisingly, don't want to come victims. Alright, and I think, you know, as I say, most young people just tend to fall into things. So there's another good quote from an ex-gang member who says this: "Nobody woke up one morning and said, 'I want to be in a gang.' You just grew up in the same area, and then both you just grew up in the same area, and both areas happen to be deprived areas with the same problems. But the main problem is that you live in an impoverished state. People have not got much money. That's one of the biggest problems. We've got no money. What can we do to make money?" So that's the situation that happens. You know, the lack of opportunity that comes around, you know, is really, really important. And I don't know if people saw I went to a brilliant meeting yesterday we had in the culture tent about banding drill. Was anyone at that meeting? Yeah, a few. I recognise a few people. There's a song out at the moment by a gang called Captain Conan called Band Drill, and they've done a little film. They've made this video. It's an 11-minute video. I think people should go off and watch it. And he sings in it. He talks about how he does this rap. He says, "Oh, well, my name's so and so. I grew up in a poor estate. My mum works. She's got 2 jobs, so I've had to go out late." And he talks about how it goes from mum being out late to hanging around the flats to seeing people looking crisp to then going and selling drugs, getting in prison, and how he gets caught up in the cycle. And it's funny because actually that's a scenario which is a real life scenario that happens. Again, in Post Coast to Profit, one of the workers talks about how one of these young people, one of these young offenders that he works with is a young person whose mum got a job working in a care home, long horrible hours. My mum's in a care home, so I've seen some of the workers working there myself. Alright, long horrible hours. The mother has to have 2 jobs, and what happens is that this young boy gets excluded from schools because mum's not around. The gangs target the Peru, I should talk a little bit about Peru a bit more, but the guy they target the pupil referral unit, and this guy gets sucked up into stuff really quickly. And I think the whole stuff about school exclusion is something that's really massive. You know, Savage Javid, when he talked about gun crime, knife crime, and doing everything in his powers, didn't mention school exclusions, you know, even though there was a report out last year by the children's charity Bernardo's that said that school exclusions are fueling youth violence. He didn't mention it, but actually young people themselves do mention it. Again, who was at the meeting for education today? Anybody at the meeting for education? Yeah, Brian was there. Brian did it. The speaker's there. Actually, in that meeting, we talked about what we call the Peru to prison pipeline. Young people talk about it themselves because there was such a clear link between actually school exclusion, gang membership, and then actually going on to become an offender. And actually, this is the truth statistics that have come out of it. Something like 87% of young people in young offenders institutes have been permanently excluded from schools, you know. And I think just to how long have we got left? 6 minutes. 6 minutes, 6 minutes and 26 seconds. Okie dokie. Right. Just to so I think that's really important to understand that there's such a clear link between exclusions and stuff. And I want to go back to talk about some of the stuff that I think Chris would have mentioned. You know, because there's been some new research out about young people and about how the brains develop and about how young people do stuff. And as I said, a lot of young offenders, a lot of people involved in stuff are people from very deprived backgrounds. When I first started working at the Youth Offending Service, I started to understand more about speech and language therapists. Actually, a lot of young people who are growing up in houses which have been sort of, you know, drug dens or been stuck on their own or whatever, actually their speech doesn't develop properly, and their understanding doesn't develop properly. And there's actually research, I can't remember the terms, the medical terms, but there's research that says that actually the brain responds to what's called trauma, and we have to do what's called trauma-informed practice when we work with young people. Right? There's a thing called, I think it's called the amygdala. There's different sides of your brain. There's a part of your brain which deals with emotions, it deals with learning. There's a part of your brain that deals with survival, right? So, for example, I'm looking around the room and I can tell you that a lot of you are hanging on my every word. But actually, if a tiger was to come into the room at the moment and none of you are going to go, I'm going to wait for things to sum up before I go. You're going to run for your lives. And actually, the same thing happens with young people. When young people who have been brought up within trauma, a lot of teachers talk about, all I did was say good morning, all I said was say hello, and that kid kicked off. It's because actually those kids' brains have been wired differently, those kids have sort of anger, and actually because I've been doing my job a long time, I've had the privilege of working with senior young people. So I've worked with some young people who have been year 10, year 9, sort of 14, 15, who are now coming up to 18, and I've been able to sort of see those young people develop. And I've had discussions with those young people where I said, look, be honest, part of the reason why you kicked off at school so much is because you didn't understand the lesson and you didn't really look silly. And I've had those conversations hundreds upon hundreds of times over the years. And I think it's important to understand, we talk about things called ACEs, which are like adverse childhood experiences. And we look at them actually, if emotional and physical neglect, sexual abuse, assaults, bullying. Actually, people who've been the victims of war, there's a big thing about the Somalian community and about young Somalian people. Actually, and a lot of Somali parents are sending their kids back to Mogadishu because they think it's safer than London. This is one of the saddest things that's happening there, right? We look at stuff like that, like actually bereavement, family bereavement is a massive thing. The number of young people who told me that they started acting up after a family member had died, and in the school, rather than being sympathetic to them, basically kicked them out. So I think we need to make sure that we understand the causes of this, and I think what we have to say. The answer. I'm going to try and sum up now, but the meetings said there's more police than the answer. Actually, no. I'm going to say hell no. All right. People don't realise that actually stop and search went down for a couple of years, but the disparity between racial disparity between stop and search does. So even though stop and search went down, the numbers went down, black people were still more likely to be stopped and searched than white people within that. And then what's happened since? Actually, there's been over 100 fatal stabbings in this year alone, but stop and search has gone up by something like 400% since then. The police have got these special powers called Section 60 orders, and Section 60 orders mean that whenever there's a stabbing, the police can just go out willy-nilly, stop people. A lot of them, they can have dispersal orders, they can bring in all sorts of powers, and these powers are being used more and more frequently. But rather than drive the numbers of stabbings down, actually they're creating a situation where people are more likely to be harassed and searched and so on. So I think actually when we need to talk about, we say the police, rather than Jeremy Corbyn saying that he wants to get 10,000 new police officers, actually we need to say what's the cost of that. It'll be better to invest that money in nurseries. And people talk about youth clubs, but actually a lot of damage is done before young people go to schools. We have to stop this, so we have to stop school exclusions. We have to legalise drugs. Actually, lots of young people are being criminalised in the drug system, for tiny amounts of cannabis, which is ruining their life chances. And actually, I don't think that Michael Gove should be the only person who's allowed a second, third or fourth chance. I think that young people should be allowed those chances. So, call for the immediate decriminalisation of drugs. I think the other thing we have to say as well is we need to look at resources. We have to look at mental health services for young people. We have to look at a whole number of things. And actually, even though, when we talk about some of the crimes that's happened, I want to just quickly return back to this document here. Right? There has been lots of murders, and not all of it is down to youth violence. A lot of the stuff, there was a shocking case I saw recently. There was a guy who pushed a 90-year-old on the tube track, And did people see that footage? I was really shocked when I saw that. You know, I thought, oh God, that's horrendous. And actually, if you use the tube, that's a real scary thing. Fortunately, I cycle mostly, but it's a scary thought. But when you look at the victim, I forget the name of the guy who did it, but the guy who did it is 47 now. At the age of 17, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. 30 years, we talk about the devastating effects of 30 years of neoliberalism. And I could think of nothing that shows more starkly how a young person can be diagnosed with schizophrenia, and actually 30 years later, that person he was supposedly taking crack worth £600, street value of £600, went before he did the shoving. That shows you the insanity of the world we live in. Where actually, rather than giving that person, young person, support and the mental health services and stuff, I think we need to do that. So actually, just to sum up, I think when we look at the world we live in, it's a battle that we need to say the young people doing these crimes are victims of a rotten society. They're being caught by the devastating effects of neoliberalism, between police racism on the one hand, neoliberalism on the other hand. And for us, the fight is very much a fight to actually get rid of the hypocrisy surrounding drugs, get rid of the hypocrisy surrounding, what is deemed to be more value. We need an education system that actually fits the needs of our young people. And I'm gonna leave it there, and I'm gonna hope you throw the floor open. But actually, at Marxism, we want to fight for a better world, a world where all young people are valued.
The question is, I really want to question about how the media is driving policing policy, because I remember the 1980s when they had yardie gangs in London. Well, they claimed to have yardie gangs in London, but they didn't exist. So they went to Jamaica, got a yardie gang member, brought him back to London. He gave him impunity for all the law, he actually was breaking so many crimes, unbelievable. And he was going on using armed robbery, and he had impunity because he was infiltrating the yardie gangs that never existed. And this was driven by the media. It was quite crazy. He probably thought all his birthdays and Christmas come at once because he was making a fortune. And they realised there were no yardie gangs. They shipped him back to Jamaica with a fortune. It was incredible. I just want to ask that question about media driving policing policy. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Okay.
Thanks very much, Dean. I mean, I wanted to say two brief things. One, reassuring that I live in Waltham Forest and you tell me there are lots of gangs in Waltham Forest. On a serious note, I'm the mother of a 23-year-old son, and when the school told me, he's white, when the school told me they thought he was involved in a gang, I just thought it was some sort of make-believe, and I'm not going to go into details to that, only to say that he was, and a 22-year-old man anywhere shouldn't know people who have been killed, but also, the reason, I think I've been a very good mum and I've loved him a lot, but he's very, very intelligent, I think, and he didn't necessarily see a future, so he searches something else. He has somehow come out of that, and a little visit to the youth offending team, but is still scared to go to places in our neighbourhood, which is horrible, really. And on the way into Marxism today, there is a blue cordon in Leighton where somebody has been shot. Has been killed. I'm not sure how. And it's terrible how desensitised you can feel. I just said to a comrade who was travelling in with me, oh, that's probably somebody been murdered. Really last thing I wanted to say dead quickly is I'm a cancer nurse, and people think that must be very hard and sad. Actually, what's sometimes harder and sadder is the lives that some of the people live. And this patient, she had brain cancer. So her kids were telling us what her personality was like before she came out of this coma. And she's a very angry, poor woman whose one kid is in a pupil referral unit. The other two had just got jobs at Sainsbury's and Tesco's. They had to give up their jobs when their mum was diagnosed to look after their baby sister. She's now well, and she's finding life very fucking hard because one of the kids has started selling drugs. And, they're a white family, they're incredibly poor, and they need so much more. And all the things Dean talked about, they need to live in a society that values every individual. Those kids should never have had to give up their jobs. It's amazing they got those jobs. And, I just think cutting Sure Start, the Tories, they're so hypocritical, it's outrageous and it needs to change, and that's what we want to do here.
it's like the scenario that Dean has painted is absolutely real, and when you hear about, as Janet has pointed out, the cordon today, we have to, understand and sympathise with every single victim and the family and friends of the people who've died as a result of knife crime and so on. Every single victim, not just the innocent victims, but the people who have been caught up in gangs and stuff like that. It's very real, and when you hear mothers crying about their sons being the victims of knife crime and so on, it's real and it's pertinent. But it is important to keep these things in context. We're talking about crime has actually gone down, which cuts against the idea that having more police numbers have gone down, crime generally has gone down, so there's no correlation between police numbers and reduction in crime is a nonsense. It is the case, however, when crime has gone down, the overwhelming majority of us will not be victims of knife or gun crime. The overwhelming majority of young people are not involved in gun and knife crime, are not involved in gangs and so on. And it's a tribute to them, it's a tribute to their families, it's a tribute to their teachers and their communities that the overwhelming majority are not involved in that, despite all of the austerity and so on. However, of course, the picture that Dean has painted has been real, and we do need to understand the circumstances in which those things have happened. Dean talked about the recent Bernardo's report talking about exclusions. In 2001, the then Chief Executive of Bernardo's, Martin Neri, said, and I quote, "The 13,000 young people excluded from school every year may as well be given a date sometime down the road by which to join the prison service, because that's where they're going to end up." I've been a criminal barrister for the last 10 years. I cannot remember the last time a client I represented had not been excluded. Someone much more senior than me, a guy who I know who does trials in the Old Bailey all the time, has been a barrister for 39 years, and he does the kind of cases you go to. By the way, go to the Old Bailey and go to one of the trials. Almost every single one of the 19 courtrooms that they've got is likely to have gang-related murder trials going on, and they'll have drill music videos showing, and that'll be a critical part of the evidence that is being used to convict people. That barrister cannot remember the last time he represented someone who hadn't been excluded from school. It is a real crisis and is a central part of the issue and the problem. Just quickly on the question of drugs. I mean, as I understand, it's worth over £5 billion in this country. It's massive, it's big business, yeah, and people are being drawn into it, because the tiny minority drawn into it because of the hopelessness of their life, because they're marginalised and excluded. We have to do something about that. I think it's right we should have a debate and a discussion about drugs and the hypocrisy surrounding the drugs trade, but actually, ultimately, rather than the temporary release that drugs provide people with, I think we want to talk about how we need to fight for and create a completely different, a completely better society where the best that people can hope for is not just the temporary release, the temporary high that drugs and the likes of those can provide them with.
Thank you. Person with the grey t-shirt with the white stripes.
Yeah, I'm an early years teacher. I work with children of 3 and 4 and younger who've got special educational needs, and I think I'm really glad that Dean's talking about the cuts to Sure Start and things like that, because the area I work in Brent, in North West London, I work in a place called Harlesden. Anybody from London will know about Harlesden, because you don't go there, do you? That's what you're told, you don't go to Harlesden. You just don't go there. I work there. I obviously go there all the time. I work in 2 schools, and I work in 2 schools on 2 different estates, about less than a mile apart from each other, who are at war with each other. But I work between them all the time, and so do lots of the staff, and we're fine. I mean, they're perfectly safe. But the young people living on the estate, Stonebridge, can't come down to the other estate by the other school I work, because. And so we often see people, we watch kids because we know them, because we knew them when they were 3, and we regularly we're having whip rounds for those kids that are being killed to give their flowers to their mum and stuff, because we're looking out for kids that we work with at 3 and 4. There was another one that died a few weeks ago, was killed in Harston High Street. It was horrific. But what I did want to say a bit more hopefully is I'm really glad that Dean brought up the stuff about brain science, about ACEs, about the amygdala, that releases all these chemicals in your brain, so that from very, very early ages, and even in the womb, because women are stressed while they are carrying their babies, and the hormones that are being released in their bodies as a result of stress are affecting their baby's development in their womb. And after they're born, when they're constantly stressed, actually your brain cannot develop properly because those hormones are blocking your ability to be able to make the connections in your brain. So we're seeing young people, as Dean said, that haven't been able to develop the understanding of the consequences of their own actions, while at the same time being forced logically into a system that excludes them, that pathologises them. I've got a 4-year-old in my class, right? I teach a class of children with autism. I've got a 4-year-old who's already been excluded from school. You know, we actually kind of saved him from the beginnings. Of course, a black boy with special educational needs, absolutely gorgeous kid, wouldn't hurt a fly, actually. But already he came with all this paperwork saying, basically calling him a thug. One of my colleagues said, that's not an educational piece of writing. That's a rap sheet. He was 4, for God's sake. You know what I mean? Absolutely ridiculous. But there's also a lot more research going on at the moment about the teenage brain and about how teenagers actually are completely physically and mentally unable to hold themselves back. They're incredibly impulsive. We all know that if we've been parents of teenagers or we've been teenagers ourselves. You do silly things when you're a teenager. But if those silly things that are offered to you are as dangerous as they are for a lot of young people, then being a teenager and being impulsive isn't just going to get you in a little bit of trouble like it does for some of us. It's going to get you in an awful lot of trouble and you're going to prison or worse, or dying. All right, so be a bit more positive. I don't know if anybody else heard. I wasn't here yesterday because I was actually at work because we were having a Saturday fun day. Not so fun when you've got to work on Saturdays, but I was listening to radio in the morning and Leroy Logan, who's a top black policeman, was talking, and he was actually challenging the narrative in a very similar way to what Dean has today. Actually, I thought it was really positive what Leroy was saying, and I tweeted him to sort of say that I agreed with him, because he was talking about, we've got to move away from a narrative around feral youth. We've got to start talking about ACEs, about adverse childhood experiences, and what happens to young people's brains as they're growing up, and actually to move into a narrative that helps us explain. Yes, I'm finished. Helps us explain how it's changing, but. Very last word, is I think we're knocking at an open door at the moment as well around exclusions. There's lots and lots of work going on fighting against exclusion, so I think that's something really positive that people should get involved with, and also against the cuts to STEM provision and early years provision.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm not going to be able to call everyone.
Okay, I wanted to say something about the public health model, which I don't know if people know. One of the things that's emerged recently in the wake of the government's kind of continual failed crackdown has been an attempt to say we need to shift policy away towards what's called the public health model. And for anyone who's looked at the crackdown, it appears like this is quite a progressive move, because instead of talking about criminalising young people at a young age and putting them through the criminal justice system from the age of sort of 10 or 12 or whatever, you're now talking about saying this is a model that should be treated more like healthcare, which sounds very progressive. But when they're talking about it, what they're talking about is treating it like a virus. Treating young people like a virus means saying if we identify a young person that we think is at risk, then we move with all of our power to isolate that young person from the situation. That means using youth offending teams, means using social services, means using the education department and schools, but it also means using the police. And it means you use all those services to isolate that young person to stop them infecting other people. Now what it goes on to do is to say, well, that means you have to have information sharing between all the different agencies. Hence the matrix that Dean talked about is not just used by the police, it's used by all those agencies who can all add names to this database, and you need never be told that you're on the database. In fact, they use Facebook to see who's friends with someone that they've added to the database, and quite often use that as a basis to add them to the database as well as a possible known associate. And so you get the multi-agency approach ends up building a huge picture of all the people that they say are at risk, but really in fact puts those people at risk, because more intervention by the police and by other services actually identifies those people to gangs and makes them actually a lot more vulnerable. In fact, what you really need to, if you want to talk to people who've experienced loss and who've been victims of gang violence, lots of them want to move away from where they live now to the other side of London and to be taken out of their immediate circumstances. And of course we can't do that because there's no bloody council houses anymore. So you can't move the kids who want to get out of the gangs, who want to move away. There's no way of moving them. So actually what the public health model does in its, and that it finally, is it attempts to put a softer face on repression, but doesn't deal with any of the underlying causes of repression. So I think we have to be very sceptical about those who claim, and those include the police and include lots of people more to the sort of soft left, who now say this is an alternative to the Tory crackdown.
So next.
Sorry, I'm autistic, so I had to correct that. Okay.
That's fine.
Mine is a very, very short question. The new funding that's been provided to prevent gang involvement for year 5s and year 6, so 10 and 11-year-olds. I have, in our team, I work in the field children's services. In our team, we've recruited 3 people to be involved in this project, but I don't know what to think of it. So I just want Dean to make any comments about it because it's brought by the Tory government, and I'm obviously cynical.
Hiya. I'm a high school teacher from West Brom by Birmingham, and I'm a mother of a mixed race son who's just gone into year 7 in school. When my son was a baby, his dad was murdered with knife crime. He was stabbed 14 times, and as a result of that, my son has never known his father. There was a boy down the road from me recently. He was killed. He was stabbed more than 20 times, one through the eye. He was 15. And knife crime terrifies me because it's so easy for young people to be brought into this, and especially because my son now has got no father figure at home for him. I want to make a point about education because I was in your talk yesterday when you talked about how education is failing black children. And as a mother of a mixed race son and a teacher in an area that is extremely multicultural, I feel really passionate about this. And their children's faces are missing, not from the classroom, but if you pick up any textbook, there is no black faces in there. We do not teach anything that those children can identify with. And what does that mean for them? Why are we teaching them about white history and we don't teach them about their history? Because actually, they're taught in snippets American black history, but what about the slave trade in Britain? They don't know nothing about that, And if they're not taught about their own history, where do they fit? They fit where they see themselves on TV, in the news, in gangs, in music, and we're not giving them any of the narrative. So when they leave school, or if they make it to the end of school, this is what they do because they need that sense of belonging. That is where they are told that they fit. And so because of that, we are exacerbating this problem, and we don't need more police. What we need is a better education system that allows them to fit in. And I mean, my son has got SEN needs, he's dyslexic, and I was repeatedly told, your son is lazy. He is very clever, he's lazy. He's not lazy, okay? He's really intelligent, but the teachers aren't recognising the fact that his intelligence doesn't come out as reading and writing. His intelligence comes out with being able to discuss things, and this is the problem.
And now I'd just like to ask Dean to sum up, but thanks a lot for being part of the discussion, and sorry to anyone that I wasn't able to call. Thank you.
Nikki's right, I am going to say to you, join the SWP afterwards, but thanks for doing that anyway, Nikki. I thought that was a really brilliant discussion. Can people hear me? Is this working? Yeah. I thought that was a really, really, really brilliant discussion. Now, I'm not going to be able to cover everything, but actually there's some really important things I do want to cover. The question about the media driving policy, I think there's no doubt that the Daily Mail and the Daily Express, with their constant drip of racism day in, day out, try to create a situation about violent gangs. There's no doubt that actually the drill and band music, the band and drill music, which has come about because of the campaign by the Daily Mail. And actually, it was really interesting watching those young people yesterday. Some young rappers who said they were getting old and they were younger than 30. So God knows how it is to me. God, right? It was really interesting listening to them about how actually the fact that they can put their videos up on YouTube and they can actually record and make music without the use of having to go and being exploited by record companies, has really liberated their lives. But now that the government are actually attacking them and bringing in racist legislation, it's the same legislation that was used against ska music and used against black people throughout the ages. How that is being really this thing, and we have to, we have to fight these negative stereotypes. You have to say this is absolute crap and rubbish, and actually we have to challenge the media, the way the media roots up thing. But what's really funny, I think that's a brilliant thing about the Yardies, and what happened when the police actually put up Jamaican criminals, brought them over, paid for their flights, put them up in luxury hotels, and actually enabled them to go on some sort of drug crime spending free. But what's even worse than that is actually Stoke Newton police station. I live in Hackney. In Stoke Newton police station, there used to be, it's down the road from Sandringham Road. If people know Hackney, there's a road called Sandringham Road. When I was growing up in the 80s, it was called the Front Line. It was where all the drug dealers congregated. And actually what would happen was, the police would regularly go down there, would raid the drug dealers, arrest them, confiscate their drugs, and then sell them back to them. This is true. You can go. People should seriously go. Certainly, yeah. Coke, yeah. Let's call the police Stokey Cokey. There's a whole words thing. Actually, it's no wonder that county lines has developed. It's partly because of technology. If people get a chance, but I'll talk about it a bit more. If people get a chance, they can go and see my meeting I did last year. I'll talk a little bit about how technology and capitalism shapes crime. But I think part of the reason why the county lines has come about is because actually the police were raiding people's dens if they knew where you go, and actually confiscating the drugs and actually selling them themselves. So I think it's really disgusting. I think one thing that I really need to get across, and I think I'm glad that Brian mentioned it, is that, as someone who works in the youth justice system, and someone who's worked with excluded young people for a long time, I'm obsessed with I've got to admit, my mind is always on guns and knife crime and whatever. But it's important to remember that something like 97% of school leavers go into education. And the cycle of violence that we hear is only really a small, tiny minority of young people. So it's important to sort of keep that in perspective. But at the same time, we have to understand that capitalism is creating a world where young people are more and more a thing. And I'm going to come back to it again. The jury service, the stuff about the court, who mentioned stuff about courts? Actually, I did jury service earlier this year in January. And people were going up to me, Dean, I'd love to do jury service. Oh, it'd be great. If you get a banker, you can send him down. If you get this, you get that. And in the back of my head, I was thinking, no, this is not what's going to happen. Actually, we know from the criminal justice system, actually, the first, you're not supposed to talk about these things out in public, but the first case I went to was like the young people that I sort of work with. And I thought to myself, this is a real busman's holiday for me, because actually we know that the jury service and we know that the criminal justice system, if you are creating fraud, if you are some multi-million-pound executive who puts flammable cladding on, you get to walk away free. But actually, if you're a little black kid who's been in the care system, you're more likely to be put in front of a judge. And actually, we've had to fight hard to make sure that the people who get caught up in county lines drug trade are now seen as victims by the police, rather than that, And I think, what's important, I think, I'm really glad you said what he said about the public health model, and the people realise, actually, I never said that in my meeting, because actually I think the points you're making are true. There are some good things about the public health model. Actually, they stopped school exclusions. That's the one thing that I thought was really pertinent. But alongside that, there was a campaign of more aggressive policing and stuff like that, and we have to say no, we're not for that. If you want to have a public health model, I'm for a public health model that actually puts more resources into mental health facilities. I'm in a public health model that goes around, since the Tories came in power in 2011, something like over 1,000 Sure Start centres have been shut. So I'm for a public health model that actually reopens those Sure Start centres, that makes sure that young people from an early age get a chance, get the sort of language, get stimulation, get to do stuff. And actually I'm for a public health model that talks about what Nikki talks about, actually broadens the curriculum, stops excluding children, stops bloody, you know, making black kids feel like they've, you know, that they've never had any culture or anything like that. And I think it's really, 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 really important that we do that. I want to talk a bit about the brain science, because I think it's really, really important. But I think as socialists, we need to make sure that we own it. I have to read to my mum at her bedside. I read to my mum, and her favourite paper, unfortunately, is not Socialist Worker, it's the Metro. Alright? And there was this horrible story in the Metro. It said, "Oh, new research says that young criminals have got problems with their brains, and they're trying to make it like somehow that there's some sort of deviant gene within your brain." And we have to say no. What this science says is if you are brought up in material conditions, such as poverty, such as gives you lack of stimulation, this can affect your brain. This is very much a material form of science, right? And actually what it also shows is the brain's got what's called neuroelasticity, right? That means you can change with positive stimulation, and as socialists, we always argue that actually it's people's material circumstances that shapes their consciousness. So for example, if you grow up in a household where your mum is working 24/7, where you've got no money, where you've got no bloody heating in, you're going to go outside. Actually, if you then move to a bigger house, you've got more facilities, people respect you, well, you're going to start changing. And we have to fight for that different world. And I think someone also said, I think you also said, Lucy also said about actually kids not having any future. It's quite funny because the thing that struck me is I've worked for a long time with young people. I've worked with young offenders for a long time and young people excluded from schools. It can be quite tough, it can be quite challenging. It can, you know what I mean? These kids have challenging behaviour. And there was a time when I started to work with what we call the schoolophobics. These are young children who are basically mainly white middle class children, who can't cope with the exam system, who can't cope. And there's a real, because they're not making headlines because they're not being stabbed, but there's a real growing thing about the number of young children who basically staying at home, don't want to be educated, can't take the rigours of society and stuff like that. And there was a part of me that thought, well, actually, you know what? I've done my time with those. Pardon the tongue, pun. I've done my time with those young offenders. Maybe I should move into this more gentle field, you know. And I didn't. I got pulled back in. Come back, get in there, go and do that. All right. But there's a common thing that unites the schoolophobics. These are the kids, the middle class kids, with the gang kids, with the kids who are committing a crime, and this is that they all have a fear of the future. You talk to young people. I remember seeing a young woman who had autism, and when I went to see her, she was staring in the wall, and she didn't want to talk to me. And I got to build a bit of rapport with her after a couple of weeks afterwards. And I sort of said to her, why was you so scared? And she said to me, oh, because someone said to me a man was going to come and see me to talk to me about my future. I'm a careers advisor, by the way. This is why kids talk to me. I should just throw that in. I'm called a progression advisor. I'm a careers advisor. So she said, oh, they told me that you were going to come. So I thought that a man in a suit was going to come to see me. And she saw me turn up in my shorts and my cycling helmet and all this stuff. And she was much more relaxed. But similarly, you talk to young people excluded from schools. They don't want to talk to you about 3 weeks down the road, let alone what they're going to be doing. And this is because we created a society where young people, middle class young kids, are being told that if they don't pass their exams, if they don't get this, if you get a C instead of a B or an A star, your life is going to be an absolute misery, you know what I mean? And this is the world we created. And actually, I think we need to totally smash the education system. Not in a sense that we have brilliant teachers, we have brilliant basic teachers, and lots of teachers. I'm sure there's a lot of brilliant teachers in this room, but the curriculum is failing. The whole notion that actually young people are not being made to feel like they're creative beings who can go out and enjoy society is something we have to do. And I think actually, if we change the education system, we will reduce a lot of the stuff that we're going to do. And I think, you know, what can we do as socialists? We can't take on the drug barons. but the things we can do, we can fight the austerity agenda and the racist agenda which is coming. So when there's a shut, people talk about youth clubs. I think youth clubs are really, really, really important, and we do need to fight for them. But similarly, we need to make sure that we fight against all public sector cuts. I'm a unison shop steward, and I have to say that actually, since 2011, but like in the last 30 years, the attack on the assault on public services has been something which has contributed to an environment where young people feel undervalued, where young people have nowhere to go, where young people and young minds are underdeveloped, and actually where young vulnerable children is to understand why so many care leavers, so many young people in care are targeted by drug gangs. You can't understand that unless you understand that the care system has been privatised. You know what I mean? Actually, a lot of care homes now are privatised care homes, and it's no wonder that these kids are becoming more and more vulnerable. So actually, the fight against privatisation, the fight against austerity, and is it something we need to do? But also, actually, people have said we have to make sure that we challenge and fight racism. We have to make sure that we fight the racist narrative around young people, you know, and stuff like that. And actually, that takes organisation, that takes fighting back, that takes actually a clear principle goal. And I think in the Socialist Workers' Party, what we're trying to do is bring people together, people who work in, you know, all different areas, but actually even if you don't work in those areas, to be able to go out and argue and do stuff. So actually, I hope you enjoyed the talk today. I hope you enjoyed the event. And one thing I would say, actually, we've got a world to fight for. We've got a world to fight where actually kids do have a future, where young people can look you in the eye, they feel respected, and actually they think, actually, you know, we've seen the stuff about the climate students' pupils, and that's a brilliant thing that actually those young people are motivated to fight for their world. We should take inspiration from them and be motivated to fight for our world. And actually, if you're not involved, I urge you to join us. I urge you to get together and actually let's start that battle today. And actually, I'm looking forward to a future where I don't have to get up and do these meetings at Marxism anymore, because actually things will change.